Hi all, we'll get going in about 5 minutes.
Hello, Councilor Bach. I can't hear anything. Are you guys here?
No, we're here. We're just about to start.
Okay. I wasn't the first. I want to be one of those kids in school that's the first in attendance, but I think Flynn beat me to it.
Flynn did beat, actually, yeah, I think, I don't know. The order I've got says Braden and Flaherty beat you too, but.
Oh, damn, I'm a slacker.
Yeah, we're gonna get going in a sec. Gotta find my. I think I hear from Candace that we're all ready. All right, Candace, we're good?
We are all set, Counselor.
Great, awesome. In that case, I am going to gavel this working session to order. My name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the Ways and Means Chair for the Boston City Council. And this is an unusual working session. It's really more to make sure that we've got kind of a guide for community members about the budget and the budget process that we're providing as a council, and then there's an opportunity for folks to hop on and ask questions. That's our goal today. The working session is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. The first thing I'm going to do in a minute is walk through the whole process of how to get involved in the budget process, because that's really what today is about. So I'm going to bracket that for a minute. Because we are technically in a formal working session, I'll still say that today's hearing is on docket 0524 to 0526, which is orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and dockets 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. But the focus of our working session today is really actually what all of that means, and how we can help community members dig into the budget process and make your voice heard. So I want to first of all just thank my colleagues, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Braden, Councillor Flaherty, and Councillor Mejia for being here. And I thought I'd give them each the chance to say a few words. The format of what we're going to do is I'll let them say a few words about why it's important to get involved in the budget process and how they'd like to help. And then I'll give a quick presentation that's really kind of about the budget process ahead so that people watching at home can understand where we are and where we're going and how you can get involved. And then we've got a few folks who've already signed up to bring their questions about the budget. But if you're watching this and you have questions about the budget, whether it's like, where would I even read the budget? Or I was reading the budget and on this page, I couldn't figure this out. We'd be happy to answer those today. So if you haven't already signed up to join us in this Zoom, you can do that by emailing ccc.wm. That's WM as in Ways and Means. So ccc.wm@boston.gov. And we'll get you the link to come join us in the middle here. So yeah, this is very much an experiment. One of the things that we really appreciated in the budget process last year was the number of community members who engaged and learned about our budget. And that was obviously largely last year. We had substantial engagement in June. And so what we're really trying to do is create space for people to get in and make their voices heard right at the start here in April. So that's our objective today. I'm going to go first of all to my colleague, Councillor Flynn from District 2.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bach, and thank you to the City Council Central staff as well for the tremendous work that they're doing. We're proud of them. I want to say thank you to the residents of Boston for engaging in this important dialogue about the budget. It's a critical part of city government. And I was in Chinatown in the South End just a little while ago, and residents were asking me about not only just city services, but the City of Boston Human Rights Commission as it relates to hate crimes. A lot of people were talking about hate crimes against the Asian community. So I wanted to, acknowledge that there's a lot of work we need to do in this city on treating each other fairly with respect and dignity. And that includes our immigrant neighbors and making sure that they have a voice in this city. And I'm very thankful that human rights is being supported along with language access, immigrant advancement, certainly our schools. But having said that, Councilor Bach, thank you very much for your strong leadership and dialogue and including residents across the city.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And thank you for being such a stalwart of this process. I know I can count on you to be tracking it all the way along. All right, next up, Councillor Braden, and then Councillor Flaherty, and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also to all your staff and central staff especially. This is a huge process. It is a marathon, and this is the second time diving into the city budget, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to understand. And I really applaud your efforts to try and open up the space and let our residents in Boston come in and ask questions and try and understand how our revenue is generated and how we choose to spend it. I feel that our budget is a statement of our values and our priorities, and I really think a really robust conversation about how we spend our money is essential to guiding us in how we move forward as a city and a community. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing comments and questions from the public this afternoon and anyone else. So thank you. Thank you also for your incredible leadership as our chair of Ways and Means. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. All right, Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to your staff and also to Michelle and our central staff for their work. Obviously, in advance as we just start the process, we're going to be leaning on them heavily in in the weeks ahead. So I'll just say, obviously, the more folks that participate in the budget process and are informed, the better the process and the budget will be. And just reminding folks that we're in a representative government and they've elected us to be the fiscal stewards, to be the legislative branch, be it either a district or, in my instance, an at-large councilor. So they should feel free to reach out to us. We work for them. So if there's something that they don't understand about the budget, or if there's an issue, or they're looking for a way to sort of get a project that's near and dear to them on the Capitol, or they're frustrated that there are things happening in their community or in our city that they feel requires or needs additional funding, and or if they've identified something in our city that no longer works or has outlived its usefulness or is wasteful, they should feel free to bring it to our attention as their elected representatives. And because we'll be obviously grinding it out with the administration over the weeks ahead. And so as much as they have the ability to tune in and ask those questions, they may want to engage us individually as well as district and at-large councilors, so that we could best learn the issue and also to continue to advocate for their concerns. We're not always going to bat 1,000 with folks, and sometimes the process takes longer. I know that it can get frustrating to folks that there's an issue that's near and dear to them. They want it on the forefront, and it may take a little while just because of other issues or pressing issues that may be sort of in the funding pipeline ahead of them. So just need them to bear with it. It's a lot like the CPA process, where if you don't get that project in that first round of funding, you got to continue to sort of stay at it and work it, and eventually, hopefully, that you'll get that necessary funding, you'll get the problem solved, etc. So again, happy to be part of the process again, and look forward to working with my colleagues, you as chair, obviously, and your staff and central staff as we go through the budget process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And now, Councilor Mejia, in many ways, we're doing this community working session today because Councilor Mejia invited me to come and talk at an informal Zoom that she did about the budget about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And I thought, that's something that we should actually also do on the formal side, so that it gets broadcast out over city TV and is accessible to you all. But she's been a leader in trying to make the process accessible for everyone. And so, Councilor Mejia, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. We're in good hands with Councilor Bach. She knows the budget like nobody's business here. So we're really excited and grateful for your leadership and how intentional you have been to making sure that the people are front and center on all things that deal with the budget. And so this is their money and their budget, and so their experiences should lead the conversation. And I look forward to hearing from the people about what questions they have and how to possibly answer any questions that that we can. And so again, just wanted to thank those who are showing up to have their voices heard. And I also just want to make note that this is not the only time that you'll be able to do that. I'm going to assume there'll be many opportunities for the community to weigh in. But this working session is creating a formal space, as Councilor Bach mentioned, for us to really have something that is well documented. So thank you for those who are going to participate, and looking forward to year 2. This is really exciting. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Councilor Mejia. Yes, and I'm about to go through, but we are going to have a lot of opportunities for public involvement in this process, and really just wanted to create this as a space to kind of put some of the nuts and bolts of the budget process on the record for everybody, and then take questions that folks have already at this stage. So I am going to share my screen for a minute, and I'm actually going to use a presentation that I did for Councilor Mejia's thing. Is my screen visible to folks now? Someone?
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, we got it.
Awesome.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, so we're in the city budget process. Just for folks' reference, April 14th, the budget came into the council. And now this mid-April to June period where we hold working sessions and public hearings on the budget is the period that we're in right now. And in fact, it started this morning with an overview hearing. So if you want to go see about an hour of presentation from the administration about this year's budget, you can go watch the 10 a.m. hearing that we had today. And now, right now, we're having this working session as an opportunity to just present about this and take people's questions. I really want to highlight that the first of many further opportunities for public testimony is this Wednesday at 6. We're going to take public testimony about what people want to see in a equitable recovery, specifically through city funding, including the federal funds that are coming to the city. So that's something where if you're watching this at home, if you have strong feelings about what city programs we should be funding or what economic assistance initiatives we should be setting up with some of the federal dollars we've gotten, we would love to have you come and speak on Wednesday, April 28th at 6 p.m., obviously virtually on Zoom. And if you're watching this right now, I'll just say again, you can email ccc.wm@boston.gov to get the link to come join us in our conversation right now. So then we have all those hearings, and then June 9th, the city council votes initially on the budget. The budget has been introduced as a whole bunch of dockets. There's the operating funds, which are basically anything that's city programs that you would think of that, has to be refunded every year. That's operating budget stuff. There's a separate school operating budget, and there's capital funds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But capital funds pay for the sort of physical infrastructure of the city and anything that you're really, you're paying for it now, and then you're going to use it for many years to come. So we take this initial vote in the second week of June. And because the council by the charter isn't allowed to just do whatever we want with amendments on the city budget, we're not allowed to add things to the city budget. What traditionally happens is that the council will vote down the first version of the city budget so that the administration can reintroduce it with changes that reflect the conversation that's happened, both from councilors and members of the public. So that's really the goal, is that we spend these 6 weeks really kicking the tires of every aspect of the budget and saying, it really feels like we need more funding here. Seems like too much over here. Give us more details on this. And then the administration is able to come back with a new budget that better matches the sort of hopes and demands of the city and the council. They resubmit that budget on June 16th or June 23rd. And then we do hearings on the resubmission. And then the deadline for us to vote on a budget for the coming fiscal year is June 30th, which is a Wednesday this year. And it's worth noting that this whole process works such that we take that vote in late June, and it's for the budget that begins on July 1st. So it's right up against the deadline of the new fiscal year. That's how our charter sets this up. It's also worth noting that the capital budget actually has to be voted yes on twice. That's because we're going to borrow money to fund it. And so the idea is that the council should really weigh twice the question of borrowing money on behalf of the city. And so often we will vote more favorably on the capital budget earlier in June so that we can then vote on it again later. And then, as I said, July 1st, a new fiscal year begins. So council's budgetary powers. The council is able to accept, reject, or reduce the budget. We're not able to increase funding or make changes to most department line items. If you're watching at home and you think this is a little bit limiting, so do we. There's a back and forth on the council and in the public about whether we should have different budget powers. But where it stands right now is these are our budget powers. And that's why, like I just said, we actually have to, if we want items increased, we have to say, we have to shake off the pitch of the first budget to say no, and then have the administration come back with a revised version. I was talking about this a second ago, but the capital budget is funding for large projects or investments like schools, community centers, parks, streets, bridges, basically anything physical, anything that you'd be using over time for multiple years. And it's funded through bonds, which are debt, right, that the city takes out. So the city says, we're going to build these big infrastructure things up front, and then we'll spread out paying for it over a long period of time. There's a limit on the amount of debt the city can incur. which is 5% of the assessed value of taxable property. We're well below that limit. There's also separately something you might hear about, the debt policy limit, which is that, you know, if we say we're going to build these bridges and schools and stuff up front, and then we're going to pay for it over time, well, we don't want the bills that we're building up over time to be so much every year that we've crowded out our ability to pay for the like programs and operations of the city. So we set a limit where we say, okay, we're only going to do as much capital spending as we can pay for with 7% of our operating budget, which just means in the future, we're never going to be above, out of every $100 we have, 7 of those dollars are being used to spend for things we've already built. That's unofficial. That's not a requirement on the city. That's a limit the city places on itself. We're actually well under it as a city right now. And I mentioned this, but the operating budget covers day-to-day expenses for city departments, includes staff, equipment, contractual services, supplies, materials, anything that you would have to redo every year. It's that. And the lion's share of the city of Boston budget is personnel. Like it's, you know, it really is true that city workers are the city, and what the city does gets done by them. And so that's most of the money in our operating budget. Technically, the BPS operating budget is within the city operating budget, but the council traditionally votes on it as a separate docket. That's because the school's budget, the detail level of it has to be approved first by the school committee. And so it comes through them to us, and then what we're actually authorizing is the top line number of how much money are going to our schools. But something that you'll see throughout this process is that we'll actually have 8 hearings with the Boston Public Schools, where we'll be digging into the details of all their programs, because of course, like the council cares quite a lot about the schools. It's more than 1/3 of our budget. It's a major policy priority, I think, for everybody on the body, and so we'll be digging into the details and asking for, you know, adjustments and updates and such on them. But officially, what we vote on is just that top line number. You also might hear about a mysterious thing called OPEB and about our pensions. All those city workers, you know, it's important to us, and it has been historically, that they be able to retire with dignity and live their old age with dignity and health care. And so each year, the council allocates money to help fully fund our responsibility to pay those pensions. Like practically all American cities, Boston got way behind on funding that obligation. So it had promised lots of pensions to its workers, which it wasn't in a position to pay for fully. And so the cities really had a multi-year plan to get that obligation fully funded, which is really important. And right now it's projected to be fully funded by 2027. So the city puts money every year into making that the case. Then once the city finishes catching up to speed with pensions, it's got this thing called other post-employment benefits, which is like the cost of healthcare in particular that we pay for retirees. And that's also underfunded. And so basically the plan is to finish funding pensions and then switch over to funding this OPEB. So it's like, you know, you're paying off one credit card and then you're going to go pay off the other one. But in the meantime, we do make a substantial $40 million a year payment into the OPEB trust fund. And that's basically us saying, look, we're putting some money away towards this. And as soon as we finish funding all our pensions, we're going to focus on that full time. OPEB and pensions, this is not the kind of exciting part of the budget. It's not the new department stuff. It's not the capital budget, the new, you know, physical objects in the landscape, but it takes up a significant part of the city budget, so it's worth knowing about. And then you may see in the budget process these things called revolving funds. They each have their own docket, so they're one of the reasons that I have to read a lot of words at the start of each budget hearing. Revolving funds are basically where a department takes in money for some kind of operation and then spends that money on that operation. So an example would be the Strand Theater, which the city operates in out in Dorchester. Like it would be like, oh, somebody comes and buys a ticket for a Strand Theater thing, we take in that money, and then we spend that money on the upkeep of the Strand Theater. The money's, it's not taxpayer dollars, it's coming for that service. It never leaves that service, this operation. So we have a bunch of those across different city departments. But they do need council scrutiny so that they don't turn into kind of slush funds, or you don't have money that's just sitting there for years and years. And so because of that, every year we authorize the limits on those. So if you hear about revolving funds, that's what they are. They aren't really the main heft of the budget, but they're worth knowing about. Throughout this budget process, we're gonna have lots of opportunities, like I said, for people to testify. One of them is to testify live via Zoom. And there's actually an FY22 budget testimony sign-up sheet. Ignore that part about going live tomorrow. It's already live. And you can go find that at www.boston.gov/budget-testify. That'll take you there, but I'll also throw it up in a minute so you can see the site. But if you can't find that, if you email us at ccc.wm@boston.gov, we'll get you the form to sign up. That gets you the link. You can come be in the Zoom with us, ask your questions, make your comments. That's a major part of this process since we're still stuck virtually. You know, it is a shame that we're not able to be together in person, but it has also enabled a lot of people to get involved, which we've appreciated. The other thing you can do, if you're like, well, the department hearing that I really care about is while I'm in the middle of the workday, is you can actually make a video and upload it to our website, and then we will actually play it in the hearing at the end of the hearing. We need it 48 hours ahead so we can string them together for the end of the hearing. But that is something we can do at the end of any department hearing or the general public testimony hearing. And then your other option is to provide written testimony via email. That's that email again, ccc.wm@boston.gov. And so, yeah, we'd love to have you do any of those things. Write, join us, or send a video. Yeah, and we have a pretty extensive budget calendar. We've got about 35 hearings and working sessions scheduled right now, and we'll be scheduling more as the need arises. But we're definitely hoping for your involvement and collaboration throughout. So these are a few of the things you can do to get involved. So you can read the budget book, which, as it says here, you can find if you search Boston FY22 City Budget. I'm also going to show it to you in a second. You can review the budget calendar to learn about when the council is holding hearings that interest you. If you go to boston.gov/council-budget, you'll find that there. And if you're a social media user, we're using the hashtag BossBudget on Twitter for updates. So that is my quick presentation about this and kind of our public process ahead. I want to briefly show folks a few of those sites that I mentioned. So the city's budget books can be found at this website, which you can get to by going to budget.boston.gov. And it's got lots of information about the budget, lots of things you can click through. The budget office has done a lot of work to put different kind of infographics and stuff up here. There's a place over here that says get the data and view PDFs of the budget books. So if you click through there, well, at the moment, my internet, I guess, is slow, but it'll take you to the budget books. And the same thing, if you click get the data, you'll actually get to a whole data portal with lots of spreadsheets. So if you are a spreadsheet person, this is a great place to go play with things. There's a different set of spreadsheets that are up on the BPS website that are also really great in the sense of being really manipulatable. So if you have a question, this is a good place to go. These are the books. I clicked that link a second ago. Basically, there's a whole breakdown of subsections of the books. The books are 3 physical volumes that the counselors have. But if you're interested in a particular department, you can just click on the name of the department and go read about its budget there. And the capital budgets for each department is included in that as well. There's also the council's budget process, which you can find this by going to that site, boston.gov/council-budget. And this tells you, there's a message from me. It tells you all this stuff about the process. You can find the schedule of our full hearings. You can search, figure out which department you might want to come testify about. And then it also has info at the bottom, and where it says how to testify, this takes you to the budget-testify, so boston.gov/budget-testify site we have, which will tell you all these ways that you can submit a video, write to us, or come testify live and sign up to be here with us. So, so I just wanted to, put on the video record all of these things so that people would know a bit about the ways to formally get involved in the process. Yeah, and then I guess the last thing to say is just, the city budget, it's big and it can seem kind of like intimidating. And like I mentioned, there's like 3 books to put it all in. But at the end of the day, it's just money that we're spending on things, right? And so it's pretty simple in the sense of, like Councilor Braden said, what are we prioritizing? And then like, what are we actually putting into place in terms of staff, materials, operations, to actually get stuff done? And so those are questions that I think we on the council all hear we hear our constituents asking all the time, and we want you to come into the process and ask those questions. So I think I'm going to go to, I know Sarah's with us. Sarah, there you are. Great. So I'll go to you for your question. And then I'll say again that if you're watching this and you want to come into Zoom and ask us your questions, you can email ccc.wm@boston.gov and we'll get you the link. So go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. You would think I'd know the basics of the budget after many years of doing this, but I have a particular question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be asking. The city, I know you talked last year about starting something like a conservation corps. Don't know if that's in the cards this year, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this. There are crumbling stone walls probably everywhere in the city. This is one in particular between Jamaica Pond and Parkman Drive as heading outbound. And it's been crumbling. We've been told, oh, put it in as a 311 call. It hasn't gotten fixed. Now it's worse. I don't know if it's the CPA thought it didn't rise to the level of one of their projects. And so I don't know, like, what would be the best way to try to ask for something like that?
Yeah, so, well, I think there's a few different ways to ask for something like that. And actually, this might be, this is probably helpful to folks at home too. So one way is to push for, a specific capital improvement to be committed to, right, at a particular intersection. So like there, right, you've got a wall. So then it's, asking the district councilor and the at-large councilor is, hey, could you really tell the city this is a priority? And it's showing up at the, what kind of land is the wall on?
Well, that particular one, I think must be city. It's funny because DCR is, Parkman Drive is DCR, but I think the wall might be considered city. Prince Street is city. So it gets a little muddy.
Right.
I'm not answering clearly because I don't know for sure.
But it would be, no, and that's good too, because often that comes up is like the places we care about in the city. We don't always know whether it's Public Works' land or Parks' land or someone else's, right? So, but let's just say it's sitting on city land. So one thing would be to push, hey, this wall needs to get repaired. Another thing that often you'll see us counselors doing in the process, and that it's really helpful when people advocate in the process, is for just like more funds for a whole program of improvements, right? So, for instance, I see Councilor Flynn on the screen with me. Like, Councilor Flynn and I and many of our colleagues on the council are big advocates for Vision Zero pedestrian improvements, right? And it's like, we do have specific intersections that we really want to see fixed, but we also just want to see an acceleration of investment in fixing pedestrian intersections, right? And that has often been a sort of focus of this council, is like, what are the things that we're just hearing from people need to happen more all around the city? And a tangible example of that last year was that we got the funding for planting trees around the city doubled because everybody was hearing like about the desire to have trees planted. So I always think that that's a good way to push too. And it lets us be in community with lots of people across the city. But you know, it's always a balance between those particular places in the general. On the green jobs thing, I just wanted to mention, as you said, I've been pushing for a conservation corps, others have as well. There is $1 million in this budget for a green jobs program, which I think has yet to take definition. And that's one of the things we're going to ask environment about at the hearing on the 10th of May. But definitely something where I think the council will be really interested in the design of that program and want to be involved. And my hope is that that is a kind of opening of a door to a conservation corps. I think $1 million in this year's budget, when you think about the climate crisis, it gives us a real opportunity to make a start here. So yeah, so that's a little bit, and I think that would be another place, right, where as we talk about what do we want those folks to do, we can think about what are the types of projects like we've talked about. We've talked about urban forestry, we've talked about making bioswales, green infrastructure, all kinds of things, but that's got to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to say, I don't know if the city employs a mason or would this all be contracted out? Like it's, and you don't have to answer that, but it's like, I want to ask in an articulate way. And I like the idea of not one particular location, but, oh, whoops, pardon me. Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to put together a coherent request.
Awesome. No, that's great. And thank you for being here with us, Sarah. And I'll say that it's one of the things I know that Councillor Flaherty has mentioned to me before is wanting more of those types of things to be something that we can do in-house instead of contracted out. Like I know he's brought up the idea of not having us have to hire somebody to prune trees, but have more of a tree pruning operation. And so I think there's definitely some interest in the council and hey, we should have a mason on staff, you know, the same way we have an arborist, but I don't know the details about what we do have within the public works world. Councillor Flynn, did you want to say something? I saw you up a minute ago.
No, Councilor Bach, I didn't want to say anything. I just wanted to, you know, again, just say thank you to you and your city council team and the central staff and the residents for being so engaged in this process. Thank you, Councilor Bach.
Thanks, Councillor Flynn. And Councillor Asabi George, you joined us after I let everybody say a word. This was mainly aimed at kind of putting on the record how people can get involved in the process and taking questions to the extent folks have them. But I did want to give you a chance if you wanted to say anything.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I am here just to also listen to our residents and those engaged in today's conversation. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Awesome. Great. Well, I think I know we've got a few folks signed up, but who aren't yet on the Zoom. So I'm gonna check in on that for a minute. So I'll probably just call a quick recess to this, unless before I do that, just if while we're here, any counselors have like process or other questions that we should answer while we're waiting.
Yeah, Councilor Bach, just give us a quick rundown. If residents do want to send an email about some priority that they have in their particular neighborhood, what's the best thing that they should do in terms of reaching out to us with their priorities?
Yeah, so the best thing would be if they sent it to ccc.wm@boston.gov. So ccc.wm@boston.gov. That'll make sure it gets into the written testimony folders, and our central council staff is doing a great job of like keeping track of all those things and making sure they're associated with the right departments so that we can like have all counselors be able to review that. So I would say to folks, it's always worth it to CC your district counselor just so they know that you're writing in as well. But anything that we get at that address will be shared and in the relevant department folders for all of the hearings that we're having.
And Councilor Bach, I have one final question. What impact does a letter or an email have when it goes to central staff about the budget? What type of priority does the mayor's office give it? What type of priority does the city council, generally speaking, give it? And what's your perspective as the chair of Ways and Means? I know it's kind of a general question, but just wanted to give the residents a little bit of an idea of what they can expect.
Yeah, so I think that well, one thing I would say is if you have a burning thing about the budget that you're feeling now, right? Like you see something in the city that you don't think is being funded the way it is. I would write to the council, to both that address, ccc.wm@boston.gov, and your counselors as soon as possible, because I think that one of the ways that the community input makes the biggest impact is the earlier it comes into the process, the more it actually shapes even the questions that the council is able to ask the administration and the things that we can push them on. And I mean, I think all counselors do this. We bring the things that we're hearing from our constituents into the room. But I think that, you know, when 1 or 5 or 10 or 100 people write about something, that helps raise the temperature, and it helps us say, you know, this is a real priority, because of course the reality with the budget is that, you know, on the one hand, it's so much money, and on the other hand, it's not nearly enough money for any of the things that we want to do. So, I mean, I certainly feel like the questions that I see counselors asking and the things I see them demanding from the administration tend to reflect what people have reached out about. So I think it definitely seems like people reaching out makes a real impact there. But I do think it helps to do it earlier rather than later. And that's actually why we're having the hearing on what people want to see in sort of a just recovery and where they want to see our priorities with the economic recovery money. That's why we're having it as early as Wednesday, because we kind of want to help have what people have to say inform the whole conversation. And of course, I explained at the beginning, and you know, Councilor Flynn, I know you know this, I'm explaining it to the folks watching, like, you know, the council's like pressure is all focused on the version of the budget that the administration is going to resubmit. And so definitely, you know, which as I said on that slide, right, it's either June 16th or June 23rd, depending on what they decide to do. So I feel like certainly over May and June, it's never too late to get your voice heard. But if there's a priority, you should be letting us know. Don't keep it to yourself.
Well, it's a great answer, Councilor Bach. Thank you for that. I just had a meeting, a civic meeting with neighborhood leaders in South Boston, specifically on what they would like to see in the budget. And I have another meeting scheduled in the South End and in Chinatown. But just as you stated perfectly, the voice of residents in this budget process does matter. It is important. And, you know, if someone's reaching out to us, you know, that's the most important issue. That's the most important thing on that person's mind right now is contacting the city. So we take that responsibility very seriously. So just want to say thank you, Council Bach, for your exceptional leadership as chair of Ways and Means.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, just for those who are tuning in, it would be helpful. I know that we've gotten some requests for capital, you know, projects or at a park or things like that. And I've always, you know, we've learned to just always defer to the district counselor, and that we would definitely be in support of it. So if you could just kind of help set the stage for district specific things, and then kind of like the role that at-large counselors can play, that would help set the stage and expectations for a lot of folks, because, you know, every office runs independently, if you will, right? Even though we're a body of 13, we all function differently and have different things that we are advocating for. So if you could just kind of help explain that. And then I also want to manage everyone's expectations around, yes, we are here to listen to the voices of the people and all the things that they're fighting for, but there are going to be times, and we've seen in previous advocacy efforts, that some of the things that folks were fighting for in terms of more youth jobs and you know, and mental health wellness and things of that nature, we kind of fell short in some of those things, but nonetheless, their voices were heard, right? So if you could kind of like just help manage people's expectations that just because they send us 10,000 emails doesn't necessarily mean that we're all gonna fall in line and do just that, just because I feel like I don't want people to have that unmet expectation that everything that they're fighting for, they're gonna get, because that is not the case.
Thank you. Thanks, Councilor Mejia. Yeah, on both those points. So on the first one, yeah, I think, so if people have, if you've got a park, a playground, a library, et cetera, that you think really needs attention and prioritization, definitely it's good if you can bring that to the attention of the district councilor. So the way the council works is that the city's divided into 9 districts, and 9 of us each have a district. And then there are 4 additional councilors who cover the whole city. So Councilor Mejia is one of them, as are councilors Wu, Flaherty, and Asabi George. And I think the at-large councilors can and often do support on asks for those capital improvements, but it's definitely something where you want to make sure that your district councilor is also aware of it. And I think it's worth noting for people, part of like, it's sort of interesting, right? The thing about the city is that it's 700,000 people. So sometimes the reason that it feels like, your thing isn't prioritized as soon as you see it and talk about it is because, over on this other part of the neighborhood, there's another thing that people have been organizing around for several years, and it's finally happening this year, right? And so it's like one of the challenges, I think, of our role is trying to be a good filter for all of the things that you see that need work around the city, and then also trying to put them in some kind of order in a fair way. And so each of our departments will have a prioritization list, right? So they'll have a list that's like, oh, well, this library needs a refresh. Nobody's touched it for a long time, or this park's falling apart, et cetera. But the reality is there are things that reshape those priorities. So for instance, if, we have a bunch of unsafe incidents somewhere and we're like, oh no, there's, we need some real lighting and safety improvements here. Or, something starts to fall apart, or, oh, there's an opportunity to bring a really critical program if we can fit out the space, right? So what's tough about the capital list is it's an eternal like reprioritization effort. And it's our job as district councilors to make sure that none of the neighborhoods we represent are getting left behind. And it's a delicate balance between being responsive and also making sure that we don't only improve things for the loudest voice in the room, right? Because you could have somebody you could have an immigrant neighborhood with a bunch of folks who are relatively new to Boston and are deeply involved in really hard work and all kinds of things, and like don't know how to come join this process. We're trying to think about ways to make this process more welcoming to everybody. But one of the things that we want to make sure is that you don't have to be the squeaky wheel to get great service in the city of Boston, right? It's a fine line between we want to invite you into this process, and also we want to say that even if you don't know about this process, we're going to make your streets safe, we're going to make your parks good, we're going to make your playgrounds good, we're going to invest in your schools, right? So it's a kind of balancing act. And I think that's important, to Councilor Mejia's point, for people to keep in mind, because we all see the city just through our set of eyes. And so part of the job of the budget process is to even it out across sort of like all these different perspectives that are at play. But that said, we have to have the public input opportunity, because there's lots of things someone might not see. Like if you're the only one who sees that wall is crumbling down, like you need to tell the city, and the city needs to reprioritize on the basis of it. So that's the balancing act we're trying to strike. And that's to Councilor Mejia's point. One thing that's frustrating is that we can't generally like grow the revenue in the city of Boston. Councilor Flynn's actually pushed hard on this, thinking about ways that we could get new revenue, and thinking about places where the state should give us more opportunities to raise revenue so that we're not as dependent on property tax as we are. But we end up sort of stuck with the same top line number. So one of the challenges with the budget is that an increase anywhere is a decrease somewhere, and all of our services feel urgent, and we're and we're trying to do well by all of them. And so that's also one of the reasons why sometimes it feels like things are incremental when we change them in the budget. The other reason things are incremental is because of what I mentioned before, which is that 90% of like the city's budget, well, the operating budget, that number's not exact, it's rough, but most of the city's operating budget is personnel, right? So if you want to really grow a department, you're going to need to, over a series of years, hire people. If you were going to reduce a department, you would need over a series of years to have attrition, right? So because these are real human lives who are our city workers, like I said, who the city's built on, there is something incremental to changing kind of department budgets. And so that's part of what drives that too. I do want to slightly correct the record, Councilor Mejia. On the youth jobs front, we got it to an all-time record last year in terms of the number of jobs going from 3,300 to 5,000 for the city and getting to the 1,000 year-round jobs.
Yeah.
So I know
We want more jobs, and I want year round, and I want more. Jesus Lord.
I totally agree. I think you and I are definitely we're joint members of the Youth Jobs Caucus. But my only point is, like, there was strong advocacy for youth jobs last year, and we got a lot more youth jobs. And also, I think that advocacy is part of the reason why you see the proposed budget like not reducing those jobs, because when those jobs were initially put in, they were paid for largely with CARES Act money, and the assumption was that they were a one-time pandemic surge. And what's being proposed in this budget is that they are not a pandemic surge; they're a permanent thing. And that doesn't mean that we don't want to grow them more from that base. I agree, but I'm just saying that there's a fine line also between like recognizing that in any given budget process, we don't necessarily get all the things that we want or ask for, and also recognizing that but advocacy that people do does matter. And if you didn't do it, we would end up in a different place and it wouldn't be as good of a place. So I just want to hold those two things in tension. All right. I think I've got Paige in. So I'm going to go to Paige next.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Thank you for having us.
No, thanks for joining us.
I have two questions. The first is I am concerned about how much we spend on over-policing in the city of Boston. So what is your advice in terms of what constituents can advocate for in terms of the budget and policing?
Yeah, so obviously this was a big topic of discussion last year, and I think will be again this year. One of the places, so this is what I think. There's a couple of things that I certainly have learned as a new counselor over the past year about the police budget, which I think could inform any advocacy. One is that when we talk about cutting that budget, and especially cutting the overtime budget, which was sort of the focus last year, there needs to be an analysis of how, not just how much. Because very frustratingly, the council cut $12 million from that budget last year, and that cut was not realized. And it's because our police budget is allowed to run over its allocation amount with overtime, and it did. So I guess one suggestion I would have for you as an advocate would be not just sort of having a target number, but really saying what are the changes that we're pushing for that would make a difference. The other thing is, I think, being real about what the alternatives are, because, and I think I will say I'm intrigued and also interested in finding out a lot more detail about the administration's put a $1.75 million pilot funding program in actually at the Health and Human Services side for some kind of alternative response pilot, like what they run in Washington, in Eugene, Oregon, and Denver. And we're going to be really interested in learning about that, because I think, one of the things that we've heard from folks on the police side and for folks who speak in support of policing is that if the 911 call volume is the same, like people need to answer those. And if you have fewer officers, you're going to have more overtime and it's all going to drive in that direction. So I think like the idea of really talking concretely about what alternative response looks like and how you stand something up that can actually like serve some of that need. And the calls that we get, like, you know, obviously it's a nightmare for everybody if a 911 call goes unanswered. So having that like alternative affirmative thing, I think is really important. So I think, you know, there's an opening there in the 1.75. There's also, I think the department and everyone acknowledges that there were some really concerning trends in the overtime this year. One of them is that we have about 100 officers who are sick, long-term sick and injured, more than we did before. Like we're up at like 270. And that's driving a bunch of that cost. And so the administration says that they're going to make some changes to try to bring that number down. We're going to dig in more on that. But yeah, I guess those are the things that I would say is like, the more we talk about like operationalizing it, like what does that change look like on the ground, and how, if you want to see alternatives, like what do those alternatives look like institutionally, because it's easier to shift funding into something else constructive than to sort of talk about reducing it without that path forward. That's just my 2 cents on how it like the conversations have seemed to evolve. And I'll just say personally, I'm very frustrated. I think my whole job as the Ways and Means Chair is to hold departments to account for their budgets, and the police department is allowed to run over its budget, which I will just say as a counselor doing oversight is a very frustrating situation to be in. And I won't deny that to you.
Great, thank you. May I ask a second question?
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that personnel is one of the largest expenditures across departments. Is this audited in any way? So for example, do we know if there are inequities between like similar types of jobs in different departments, if there are inequities by race, gender, et cetera?
So that's a good question, Paige. So most of that personnel is governed by collective bargaining agreements. And part of what that means is that you typically would see equity across grades within those collective bargaining units. Like if you're doing, you know, if you're an arborist and I'm an arborist, we both work for the Parks Department under the same deal, like we're going to get the same deal. But I think that one of the things that has happened over time in the city is that the different collective bargaining units have had different degrees of bargaining power at different times. And so you definitely see situations. I mean, I'm on the record saying that I think our civilian departments have not received the same increases in compensation that our sworn departments, like police and fire, have, and that I think that that's an equity problem. And I don't know. It's a great question, because I don't actually know that we have like the type of overall analysis that often folks now do in big businesses, right? The kind of question of like, well, what's your average female worker making, or like what is the racial equity of your pay scales look like? I haven't personally seen that data across the city, so I think that's a great thing for us to ask more about in this process. I know that we have asked departments to talk about the like racial and gender skew of their leadership in the past. That's something that's in the request for information that the council sends over to the department. So we will have some more tangible details on that, but I don't think that the overall analysis of that, it might be something that our HR department has, but I don't think it's something that's been presented to the council.
Great, thank you. I may have a follow-up question, but it escaped me in this moment.
Well, if it comes back to you, please feel free. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that the council's thinking a lot about, is like, how do you, it's one thing to govern just the subject of what your dollars are being spent on, but it's another then to also think about like the way we spend our dollars like you're making the point, right, of like who we employ and how and like what the scales are can affect some of like our core goals about economic empowerment and economic justice. And it's the same thing with procurement, which has obviously been a really public conversation in the city. You know, how do we use our purchasing power to actually drive the type of local economy that we want to see? Councilor Flynn, did you want to say a word? Sorry, I shouldn't keep taking your video as a sign that you might, but.
No, I enjoy listening to the residents. They're asking informative questions and talking about what their priorities are, and it's important that their voices are heard, and it's important that you know, that they're part of the discussion as well. So I don't have any questions. I just like listening to the residents across the city.
Yeah, and like I said, we're gonna have a big hearing on this front on Wednesday at 6. So we're definitely hoping to get a bunch of folks to come to that. Paige and Councilor Mejia, I think both of your blue hands are up from before, but just in case either of you raised them, because you had another thing you wanted to say.
I remembered my follow-up question.
Oh, great.
Obviously, we want our city employees to be paid livable wages and to have benefit packages and things along those lines that allow them to live happy, healthy lives. And also, I'm wondering about in those instances where there have been kind of created inequities, if that were to be discovered, what, if any, action is able to be taken to kind of balance the field again?
Well, it's a good question. And, you know, I think as a matter of policy, the city of Boston has a really interesting opportunity right now because all of its contracts are basically up. So like almost all of the city's departments had their contracts expire on June 30th of last year. And none of them have been resolved since then. And then I think fire, I think expires at the end of June of this year, and the BPS ones in sometime in the middle of August of this year. So I think basically we're in a situation where, you know, by September, probably all of the city workforce's contracts will be up, which, you know, is a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a crazy situation for our Office of Labor Relations to be in. But conversely, to your point, like it also creates a moment to sort of ask, you know, what are the core sort of like equity and employment goals of the city, and is there anything that we should be ensuring across the board? You know, within of course the I think that's constrained by the fact that you know, collective bargaining agreements, they're hard won, and they often, the other tricky thing, Paige, about that, and there's a couple tricky things. One is that as the council, we don't get to sit in any of those negotiations. Like we just approve up or down contracts as they come to us. The other thing that's tricky is that sometimes what's perceived as inequity came intentionally from the worker side. And what I mean by that is, say that like we've got two groups of workers who are similarly situated. Like let's say they have, you know, similar skills and educational backgrounds, they're doing a similar type of job, but one of them is over here in one collective bargaining unit and one's in another. If collectively one group decides that over the course of a decade, they're really going to push for more money in their annual salaries, and the other unit decides that over the course of the decade, they're going to push for like much better benefits packages. So let's say like they, you know, they want more flexible work schedules, they want more like leave, you know, et cetera. You could end up with a situation where the two groups of workers end up looking like they're in a very different situation, but it has to do with what they prioritized at the bargaining table. So that is a difficult thing because it didn't exactly come out of out of a difference in treatment. It came out of a sort of difference in unit prioritization. And this is a city where we definitely like very much respect the collective bargaining process and the possibility for workers to articulate their own goals. And so that's a tricky thing, but I don't think that prevents the city from having a bit of a like rule of thumb sense of like, hey, does it feel as though what people are getting paid across the board for work on behalf of the people of Boston is equitable? And I think those are good questions to ask. All right. Anything else? If nobody else has anything, then I think, because we still have a couple of people who are going to come join us who have not, that what I'll probably do is recess the hearing and just I'll hold here for a little bit, so that if people are running late, they have an opportunity to jump in and ask their questions. But I won't hold everybody else. Sarah, I see you're back on the screen. Do you have a follow-up?
No, just saying farewell and thank you.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming with us. If you're watching this after the fact, what I want to say is, as I've mentioned, there are lots of opportunities to do public testimony. But if what you have is a question about the budget, how it works, where you should look for things, et cetera, please also feel free to send those to us. So ccc.wm@boston.gov. You can CC me. I'm Kenzie Bach, KNZIE.BOK@boston.gov. Because this working session, we wanted to put this kind of explanation of the budget and open forum kind of out in the formal space, but it is not the end of that opportunity. So just reach out. It's your budget, and otherwise we'll see you along the way. So with that, I'm gonna recess the hearing, and I think I'll hold it open until 5:30. So again, others should feel free to go. I will hang out, and if somebody comes, catch their questions, and then at 5:30, if we haven't been joined by anybody, we'll adjourn. So thank you so much. This hearing is recessed. All right, Candace, we've gotten to 5:30. So thank you to Councilor Flynn and Mejia for sticking around. Since we haven't had any further folks, I'm gonna thank people again for coming. Just say that this is the beginning of our process, and we're gonna have public testimony after every hearing. So please, the members of the public, come along, make your voice heard, reach out to your counselors. And with that, we will adjourn this working session. Thank you all so much.